You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers about hikers for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Welcome back to the show, and I am so excited to introduce a new sponsor for the month of September. This is Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, sponsored by Cedar Trail Gear. We're going to come back to them in a moment. My name is Steve Adams, and it's my job to introduce people to you who have some great hiking stories. Sometimes they're accomplished 20,000-mile hikers, sometimes they're section hikers, sometimes they're young and sometimes they're old. But this week, our guest, for the first time ever on the show, is going to remain anonymous. She's referred to as Person Irresponsible, or PI, and PI will share her unique story and why she's anonymous in a moment. We've also got a great update from Katie as she's now out of the 100-mile wilderness and pushing through Maine. Once more, we caught up when she was partway up a mountain, and I promise you, it took me right back there. Finally today, we're going to have the next chapter of Winton Porter's Passing Through and his very specific take on ultralight gear. But before all that, you were probably wondering who Cedar Trail Gear are. Well, listen to this. Now, we've all heard of leave no trace, and I hope that we all apply the principles, but sometimes, let's face it, it is really difficult to dig a deep enough hole with those small plastic and metal trowels. Well, Cedar Trail Gear have come up with a solution, and like all good gear, their 3-point multi-tool has several important functions for you and the hiker in your life. This ingenious device will not only easily dig your cat hole to the correct depth, it can be used as a pick to loosen up rocks and stones in your outdoor bathroom of choice. And you can even use it as a hammer to knock your stakes into hard ground when you set up camp. It's truly that strong. I've used it myself and it works like a dream. It weighs just 9 ounces, is made of very durable aluminum, and is powder coated in highly visible safety orange. Check it out at cedartrailgear.com, where you will learn of yet another surprising use for the 3-point multi-tool. So if you're fed up with trying to dig a hole in the ground and you want a few more extras than just a trowel, check them out. I'm going to be having the inventor of this tool on the show next week, so watch out for that. Now, let's catch up with Person Irresponsible, or PI. So a couple of days ago, I think it was a post on Facebook that was, well, pretty quirky. It was somebody trying to sell a hiking book, but there was something about this post that made me want to reach out and contact this person. So here she is. This is Person Irresponsible, or PI. Thanks for coming on the show, PI.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, now the first thing we've got to do, and get it out of the way, I suppose, is your name and why you. In fact, it's not just you and I talking now. This is even on the cover of your new book. You are a Person Irresponsible. So tell us why you're going to be using PI and why you use PI all the time.
I use PI all the time. My book is written as PI. My trail name was PI. And if you want to complain about anything, you can write to Person Irresponsible and you may or may not get a responsible reply. Primarily, I stay anonymous because my book actually makes reference to Alcoholics Anonymous, and the 11th tradition of AA states very clearly at the level of press, radio and film, we should always maintain anonymity. And because I'm a recovering alcoholic, I like to show respect for the thing that kept me sober and got me sober.
Sure. I understand that. And coming from a family of similarly afflicted people, and being slightly, I guess I was slightly of that nature in my past, but it hopefully didn't take over my life. So, and I know it can be quite devastating. So you're a recovering alcoholic. I shouldn't be laughing, by the way, but I'm going to, because we're English. We talk about drink all the time, so it doesn't really matter. And for some reason, you decided to go on a 2,600-mile hike in the US. This is absolutely not normal. What led you to do this? Because as I understand it, you weren't a hiker. You hadn't done any hiking at all, had you? So what made you think to do it?
No, I'm not a hiker. I'm not an outdoorsy camper type person. In fact, many years ago, my then husband and I spent a night in a tent, and I said, if you ever do this to me again, I'll divorce you. He's now an ex-husband, and the list of complaints he had about me did not include my aversion to camping, but hey ho, here we are. And it was more of a series of happenstances. It wasn't even so much as I made a decision or this was a burning ambition. It was more that a friend watched the film Wild and said, you have to watch this. And long story cut short, I ended up under duress watching Wild, and then I read the book, and then I read six more books, and then I watched YouTube videos of people doing it, and I thought, you know what, this is really interesting. And then just by sheer coincidence, a thumbnail popped up that said how to apply for a PCT permit. I didn't even know you needed a permit, and I clicked on it, and the application date was that day and that day only. And I rushed upstairs and I got the golden ticket. And I think about... Why did
you? I mean, have you thought back to why you actually did it?
It was...
But hang on, I'll preface that question because I'm going to read it, because I've actually got the piece of Facebook that I got out the other day. You said, this is one of the bits that made me laugh. I was also 40-something, fat, funny, female, and in my fourth year of sobriety with AA. I had previously walked from the fridge to the sofa and back many, many times. I considered camping to be a loathsome pursuit. And then following on from that, I've since read that you still consider camping to be a loathsome pursuit. So What was it that made you go and apply?
I honestly wish I could give you a pithy reason. And I think even before I went, lots of people said, why are you doing this? And I had no sensible answer to give them. There was just a pull. It just felt like something I ought to do. And I wish I could be more on it. I just wish there was something more succinct I could give you as an answer. But it was literally that all the obstacles, all the excuses, the reasons to not do it just melted away. And it was like, you know what, go do this. And
it was just the PCT, was it? It wasn't any other trail. It was always going to be the PTT.
I'd never heard of any. I'd heard of the Appalachian Trail, but I hadn't really understood what it was. I didn't realise how big these things were, yes. And I'd never heard of the PCT whatsoever until I saw the film Wild.
And people are very divided over those films and those books. There's a Bill Bryson book about the Appalachian Trail, which is universally hated and loved on the Appalachian Trail. Mm-hmm. And I suspect for the PCT, people either love or hate the Wild book as well, don't they?
Most people refuse to admit they've even seen or read it. So I felt like an anomaly to begin with, because it was like, well, actually, that's one of the reasons I'm here. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not going to pry too much about how you became an alcoholic, because I kind of know the path myself. But what impact did alcoholism actually have on your life?
Looking back, it ruled my life. I just didn't know it. I grew up in an alcoholic home. So, I just had what was normal for me is not normal for society, but I didn't know that until I got into recovery. And I wasn't the stereotype that I held about what alcoholics were, which were males, which was very convenient, obviously. Yes. But living on a park bench, drinking vodka out of a brown paper bag, all of that's not how my drinking took me. I was a binge drinker. It was almost like I joined the ladette culture of the 1990s and just never grown out of it like everyone else. And so my drinking... By the
way, for American listeners, which is about 90% of the audience, ladettes, or female lads, aren't they?
Yes, who like to party. And
yes.
And it's almost like I didn't grow out of it whilst my peers grew up and got on with life and, did all the responsible things. I was always a big drinker at the weekends. And then life gets harder and harder, and I found myself reaching for wine more and more often. And what I discovered was that when I decided to stop, I could stop, but I couldn't stay stopped. And that was the issue. I could string together 3-4 days at a time, maybe even 10 days at a time. But I was thinking about drinking, climbing the walls because I wasn't drinking. So most of my drinking is defined by knots. I never drank in the morning. I never picked up a DUI. I never spent time in jail, but it was more that I was, my drinking had become very lonely and very, very solitary, and I would turn down social events. So I could go and drink my way at home. And the hangovers just became horrendous, you know, as I was getting older. And it was that realization that like I said, that I could stop, I couldn't stay stopped, that had me thinking about getting some help. And then I found out AA was free. I was like, well, that's very appealing. And off I went. And I'd love to say that, you know, it was that simple. It wasn't. I did relapse once, and that's when I realized, actually, this is more serious than I could ever appreciate. And I'm very, very lucky that I managed to stop when I did.
Now, as you know, this is a hiking show, but this is still relevant because the 12 steps, this is important in many ways. So you went into the 12-step program. I obviously heard of it. I've never been through it myself. Was that impactful? You say you've regressed once, or you fell off the wagon once. Was that generally pretty much straight away impactful for you?
No, I didn't really. I was quite happy with the non-drinking thing. I was quite happy just to sit in meetings, and I was very emotional at the time. I was very tearful at the time. I was very bewildered at the time. Right. So the 12 steps is something I started a bit later on, because what they say is, you know, putting the drink down is one part of the problem, but keeping it down is the other. Because what do you do once you've had a life of living around drink and being part of drink? You lose your best friend. That's your comforter, no matter what your emotion is. And then, of course, you have to learn to sort of live in sobriety. And for someone like me, I didn't know how to do that, you know. So when I finally sort of got into the 12 steps, it was more about learning how to be and how to interact with the world and how to sort of grow up and take responsibility and deal with, you know, things that caused me shame or guilt. I deal with a lot of anger issues that I had as an adult that I didn't even know I had. And so it was a program for living, if that makes sense. And it's that the idea of having some kind of structure I can reach for and live within that gives me sort of like guidance and support. Because otherwise I just feel a bit of an emotional basket case.
Sure. Well, we're actually going to come back to the 12 steps when it comes to your hiking in a minute, but we'll do that in a minute. So you got your permit. You actually, at this stage, you've been sober 3 years, but I can't remember what it was, 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, so just over 3 years, 3 years and a few months, yeah.
And you got your permit, and there's a bit of a clue in this one, by the way, to start on March the 17th. We're going to come back to that in a minute as well. So what did your friends have to say about this choice? Because, you know, your friend had watched the movie with you. I thought it'd be a good idea if you'd watched the movie. I guess you never thought for 1 minute you'd be heading off to do that same thing, did you?
No,
so what did they think about it?
Well, it was a bit awkward at first because the friend that had put me onto it was getting married to another good friend of mine, and I was going to be his best man at the wedding. So all of a sudden I had to say, I'm really sorry I can't be your best man anymore because I'm going to go to America and hike the PCT. But you know that? Do you remember that film we watched? Yeah, I'm going to go do that. And they just couldn't stop laughing. You know, they were just like, no, you're not. And it was like, I know. I think you could divide people into two parties. People were trying to talk me out of it, and then people that were just like, well, that's nuts. Go, you know, you'll do it. You'll be fine. It's I
bet a lot of them thought you were drinking again, didn't they?
Yeah, totally. Or I'd come back having drunk, you know.
Oh, dear, yeah. It was fun. So you got your permit. So you were kind of committed, although of course you could have decided not to go.
That's it.
Were you? And I was thinking about this. So we did speak earlier, obviously. In fact, not that long ago, about an hour and a half ago, before we started recording. We did speak, and were you excited to have that permit, or were you anxious? What were you thinking once you got it?
I think it was bewildered and baffled mostly. You know, there is a 6-month window between getting the permit and actually setting foot on the PCT.
Right.
So there is plenty of time. And all I remember doing is thinking, I'm not thinking about it. I'm just not going to think about it. I'll just handle it when I get there. You know, because it felt like the right thing to do. It almost felt like I was supposed to be doing it. But at the same time, everything about it terrified me. So I just sort of almost tried not to think about it, as it were. Well, I'll deal with it then.
You've already said that, you know, you're in the program was kind of working for you, and that was really your support network. So how did you face that prospect? Because, you know, you're aware that going on a hike like this tends to put you in the woods or on mountains or stuff like that, and they don't have too many AA meetings there, do they?
No.
So tell us how that felt to be going away like that.
Right. Well, first things first is my sponsor, who's the person who sort of guides you through the steps and helps you stay on the program. He said, write down a list of all of the things that you fear. And top of the list was, how am I going to cope without my AA structure? My friendships there, the fellowships there. It's a big part of my life. And a long way second, it was like rattlesnakes, bears, cold nights, drowning in the snow melts and all of this. And so he was really practical. He just said, look, it's a daily program. You can do much of it on your own, but just take with you all these podcasts that you can pre-download and listen to a podcast every day. And then think about your program. And then when I had to come into resupply, I could then go to an AA meeting locally, because it is a worldwide fellowship. I would only, and even before I went, I had a list of meetings that I could go to, and I had a list of contacts up and down the trail.
How interesting. So how would you all stay? So how would you know that? How would you know to find those meetings?
AA is everywhere. That's the thing. AA is everywhere. I mean, I've been on a ship and somebody has started talking and it's like, you're not in AA, are you? Yeah, I am. And so we are just everywhere. So basically I just went online and made contact with and people, anybody that you can sort of, I think, from the language you're using, I guess you're AA, and you might ask, do you know Bill W? And if they say yes, so, it's all contacts and connections.
Interesting. How interesting.
Google is always your friend.
So I want to start with your preparation for the hike, because at some stage you said you were ignoring the fact that you were going, but in fact those months go by pretty quickly. So you started coming around near the hike. So let's start with how did you prepare for the hike? Let's start with the physical side of preparing. How did you prepare for the hike?
I ate a lot of cake. I figured
that'll do it.
I figured I'd need to take a lot of calories with me, so I ate a lot of cake. I've got great saddlebags, and they just expanded considerably before I went.
So you thought you'd store them, store the calories before you went.
And that, to be honest, that worked. I highly recommend that as a strategy, because I did not get that famous hiker hunger until I was 4 months in.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
So did you lose a lot of weight on the hike?
Oh yes, I lost a hell of a lot of weight on the hike. I mean, I was skin and bone by the end. And,
wow.
Yeah, I mean that.
Because they say women often don't lose a lot of weight. I mean, I lost 60 pounds the first time I did the 80 and 50 the second time. So I'll put it all on with interest, by the way. But you do tend to lose it pretty fast. So the physical preparation, and I know we're going to talk about what it was like when you first started hiking in a minute. And I've always said, I don't think you can really properly prepare for a hike. You just don't know until you start climbing those hills. Man, that really takes over you. But you can do something about gear, can't you?
Yeah.
So how did you prepare, and how did you work out the sort of gear you needed?
Right. First thing, I just want to say this. I live at 400 feet above sea level. So when I arrived at Campo, and that's 4,000 feet above, I already had altitude sickness before I even walked anywhere. So the gear, I watched, again, those YouTube videos are invaluable, because obviously it's such a debatable thing. Are you going to go ultralight? And I was like, I'm not going ultralight, I'm going luxury. And I knew I was going to be taking a laptop, so I knew I was doing this in the most demented way anyway.
Oh my gosh.
And it's a very lightweight laptop, but nonetheless it's a kilo you don't actually want to carry. And and everybody goes on about, weigh this, weigh that, and people get, they have spreadsheets and all this going on. And all I could think of is how cheap, how much money I didn't want to spend on it. So I had cheap tent, I had cheap clothes, I had cheap everything. My trainers cost like £12, which I think is about $20 or $18 or something. And so I very quickly learned actually good quality equipment is essential. So I did swap my tent out very quickly, because basically my original tent had its own individual climate. So I used to wake up every morning absolutely soaking wet, and not fun. Yeah, no, not fun.
So it's one of those things. Preparation. I mean, I'm not a great preparer myself, but preparation is really important, and getting the right sort of gear does really help. But now you chose to head out on March the 17th, 2020. That was quite a significant day for you, wasn't it? It
certainly was. That's the date of my divorce, which has always been very emotional about. And then 1 year later, I'd walked into AA. So it was the day I joined AA. So the fact that I then started on the PCT on the same day, it goes back to this whole thing of, it felt surreal. It felt like it was being mapped out for me rather than anything I particularly decided to do.
Yeah, that's interesting how that happens, isn't it? Yeah, it's almost like the serendipity of the trail, and that happens in all trails, I'm sure. But March the 17th, 2020, was also significant for other reasons, because around that time, things were really starting to kick off with COVID, and you'd got your permit, you've got your visa, you're coming over to the States. What did that, you must have started hearing about it, obviously, a few weeks before anyway. So you knew it was in existence, didn't you? How did you make the decision still to go?
Well, it was a tough one, really, because I think at the time, people didn't really know what to make of it, whether it was just more news hype or whether this was something to be taken really seriously. So it was a very confused, looking back, everybody was really, really confused.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was just, it was just really hard to work out the wood from the trees, really. And so I realised things were getting serious when America had put in the travel ban, but not for the UK. They'd done it for the whole of Europe, but not for the UK. And so I was sort of laughing, going, well, we haven't Brexited yet, It's like, are we in Europe? Have we floated off, Yeah. So I was able to just get in just before the ban was then extended to the UK. And then within a sort of a week of being on trail, California then sort of shut down as well. And it was, people then were flying back to their countries of origin thinking, our insurance is going to be cancelled. Mine wasn't. The Americans were talking about martial law, and it was just a really frightening time. And it became... it became very frightening. Like Facebook became quite a place of antagonism. And so it was very difficult to know what to do. But because I'd put everything in storage, I'd given up my house, there was just, it was like, well, I might as well just carry on.
You had nothing to go back to, did you?
Nothing to go back to. But it was, the optimist was, this will all be over by midsummer, None of us had a clue. And again, looking back, the headlines were a bit skewy because they were like, 6 people have died. And you're like, but this is a population of 360 million. It was just really chaotic that whole time. But I made the decision to stay. That's on my back. And, I stayed and I walked.
You started walking actually on the 17th, didn't you? Because you flew out a few days before, started walking on the 17th of March.
First full day on the trail, yeah.
So you got started. How soon did you realise that this was not going to be just a walk in the park?
About the first mile.
So no honeymoon period then.
No, first mile, it was like, wow, American miles are so much longer than British miles. And then I had, shortly after I stopped to get water, in inverted commas, I was actually, somebody else had started and they was walking along with me, and I said, I've got to get water. I didn't need to get water. I just needed to stop walking. I was in so much physical pain. I'd never walked with a rucksack that heavy. It was just ludicrous. I realised I was just way out of my depth. But so it was very humbling, because I remember when I'd watched Wild and she'd done 6 miles in the first day in the baking desert, and I'd looked at my friends going, 6 miles, that's ridiculous, and it was like, okay, I'm going to do 7 miles today. I'm just going to beat her, and that just became that first target, was I'm doing 7 miles, and that's that.
And then it became even more serious because you had to actually climb somewhere, didn't you?
How's it great? So that was I think that was, I can't remember now how long it took me to get there. It wasn't, I landed in Hauser Creek. Well, there's one guy already with a injured ankle, and he was fit and healthy, and there was another guy that was also injured, and they were leaving straight away, and all these other people looked young and fit and very intimidating to my eyes. And then the next day, so I slept at Hauser Creek, and then the next day it's a 1,200 foot climb, which anyone that's long distance hikes is a tiny little climb, but it's the first big climb. And like I say, it's 4 times higher than my house is above sea level, And I remember greeting just about everybody that day, hello, 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 as they overtook me. And I was just like, oh, this is terrible. This is just terrible. And the weather was dreadful, and people were racing to get to Lake Marina to book into a cabin and get some respite from the weather. And it was like, oh, I'm going to be out here forever.
And you knew that not so much you couldn't go back, because you could go back, but you would have had to restart your life in a different way. So you just kept going forward. But this is when and you were saying to me earlier that you felt inferior because you were being overtaken all the time. So how did you get the inner strength to keep going forward when really the answer was to go back or go home?
I think I think it was partly his ego. You know, it's like I can't turn tail so quickly. And I did see an awful lot of people stop really quickly, and you know, some would blame it on COVID. Other people were more, you know, more affected by their physicality and so on and so forth. So it was a case of, you know what, I'm just going to keep going and see how far I can get, and I'm just going to just put one foot in front of the other. And that, you know, that's what the program has taught me, is to not focus on the outcome, to not worry about the future, do what I can do today, and learn to be satisfied with that. So the imposter syndrome and the feeling of inferiority only actually left about 2 weeks before I finished.
Isn't that remarkable? Don't you think that's remarkable that you can do? You can be so, you could have probably walked more than 99% of people in this United States of America have walked, and yet you still felt you may not be able to do it until just before the end. Yeah. That's remarkable to me.
And it was things like, you know, where I actually started to appreciate qualities about myself was, yes, I have to walk for longer hours, so I might have to walk 12 or 13 hours a day to cover a marathon, whereas fitter, younger people, you know, they can do 30, 35 miles a day. An awful lot of bravado is out there as well. So I realised that not necessarily people are doing what they say they're doing.
Or BS, as we call it.
Yes, that's the one. So, you know, but it was that sense of, I got to know myself and I got to know my limits, and it was like, I've just got to do this my way, and it's not going to be pretty, but a win ugly is a win. You know.
Oh yes, absolutely, yeah. And let's go back to this, the 12-step program, because you said it actually helped you in some way give some structure to your own hike and allowed you to do it by living through this program. So give us some examples of how that worked for you.
Well, for example, I am obsessed with worrying about things. And when you're in the wilderness, there's an awful lot to worry about. And you very quickly realise almost everything is out of your control. There's very little that's in your control. Sure. And that's, you know, the program teaches us that. It's just, you know, the Serenity Prayer is very much, you know, accept the things I cannot control and you know, and live with that. And so it really forced me to focus on just for today, and how am I going to cope with this, and not to give in to my fears, and not to constantly stress about things that are far in the future.
But at that stage, though, once you were starting to use those principles, were you actually starting to enjoy it, or were you pretty much having trouble enjoying it at that stage? Because, you know, you're meant to get joy from this. And I recently came back from a trip to the Sierras myself. I unfortunately only did 3 days for the third time. And I wasn't getting any joy out of that hike at all. For 3 days, I wasn't. So did you get any joy out of the hike at any stage?
I can honestly say that I think through hiking is the closest thing to childbirth, because it is sheer agony all the way through, and then you're got this end result of sheer bliss. And the happiest I've ever been was the first 6 months after my thru hike in my life, because it was it was just that sense of accomplishment and that sense of inner peace just went on and on and on. But I worked hard for 6 months to get that.
Sure.
So a typical day, though, you know, first thing in the morning, getting up on your feet would be tear-inducing. You know, my feet really struggled. My ankles especially really hurt every single day. But between 10 and 11 most days, I found that my brain just forgot the pain, and I could really cruise along. And then
so that was your 1 hour, was it? 1 hour
a day. But it's those small little details, you know, a nice meal at the end of the day. Mostly you didn't have nice meals at the end of the day, but you know, just those little. I remember once I bought what I thought were like jellied fruits or something, and it turned out they were sweets. And I remember thinking, this is like the best thing since Christmas. You know, this is just great. So the joy came in, like, you know, and I saw bear up close, and I coped with rattlesnakes. So the joy of accomplishing things, and the joy of seeing unexpected things, and the joy of facing your fears, they're indescribable. So I would say it was 99% sheer agony and 1% worth it.
But there you go. There we are. You know what? The worth it bit is the important bit. The 1% is the important bit. And you actually quickly teamed up with a couple who actually actually in some ways helped you, didn't they? Because they were kind of party animals, and you weren't really into that, and it gave you some focus on what you should be doing, didn't it?
And that's it. It was, again, back to my insecurity and lack of preparation. You know, I hadn't got a working phone, and I talk about this in my book as to why that happened. You know, I was stupid at times, so safety in numbers was a really important thing. But then it becomes clear quite early on, there are people who sort of camp along the trail and they bounce along, and there are people who are absolutely there to walk end to end, and it's very easy to get lost in somebody else's hike. And
absolutely.
And so, you know, because I'm not a drinker, and because, like I say, for 3 years of my life I'd sort of socialized within a fellowship, so I'd stayed really, this was the first big adventure out in the big bad world, as it were. It felt like a sort of, you know, growing up at long last. And so you know, it taught me a lot about having to sort of eventually, you know, you realize very quickly that you're not hiking your own priorities, right? It took me a while to realize, but then I realized it, and I had to go on my own way, and that's what I did. And you know, and then the next 3 weeks after that were the loneliest I've ever been in my life, because I would go days and days and days not seeing another soul.
Because a lot of people did leave the trail, didn't they?
Most people. Yeah. You know, in an ordinary year, you'd see people morning, noon, and night.
Sure.
But this, you know, the longest was 4 days between seeing people.
Wow. How did that impact you as a person? Because did it make you? I know it wasn't available. Did it make you want to have a drink though?
No, the thing is, I'd given up smoking.
Oh my God, that as well.
I know. I'd given up smoking just before, so about 10 weeks before I'd had my last cigarette. And so what I found was I'd get sort of 90% of the way up a mountain, and then suddenly I'd need a cigarette so bad. You know, I could barely breathe, but I'd still want this cigarette. No, that was the thing, is that at no point did I actually ever want to drink. And it's something I've learned about my own drinking, is that actually I don't enjoy drinking. I don't enjoy the taste of drinking. I drank to change my feelings. I couldn't, you know, if I was down, it would bring me up. If I was happy, it would make me exuberant. So alcohol for me had this, you know, it was an anesthetic as well as something that put icing on the cake. And so that's why this 12 steps really helped me balance out those feelings, because they come back when you put the drink down. You know, that's the joke, is the worst thing about putting the drink down is your feelings come back, and the worst thing about putting your drinking down is the feelings come back. And yeah, so, you know, there was no cure for loneliness. I had to just deal with it. There was no cure for fear. I had to just deal with it. And you know, tiredness.
Don't you think it strips you bare though? Don't you think so? You know, a hike does strip you bare and makes you responsible for you and your ability to go forward every day. And we've talked about this in the past. It certainly has applied to a lot of people who do the AT anyway, and I'm sure the PCT, that you've got so few options, and it's having those few options which makes life simpler and easier to address, I think, don't you?
I completely agree. For me, doing a thru hike is the closest thing as doing the 12 steps that any other human will get, because you have that period of excitement, you know, that period of relief. Oh, this is very interesting, isn't it? And then after a few weeks, the novelty is worn off, and it's like, okay, now I have to deal with the reality. It's uncomfortable, it's cold, I'm frightened, I'm hungry, I'm lonely, I'm tired, you know. You've got your memories to go with you. You know, my head never shuts up, and other people have said the same thing. And so, you know, the thru hike, eventually you learn how to switch your mind off. Eventually you learn how to tap into your surroundings. Eventually you learn how to deal with rattlesnakes, you know, and it's that you know, you have to face every single one of your fears, and that's why I found the 12 steps and the thru hike so similar, because you're still facing your fears and you're still stuck inside your own body, and so it's a very healing thing to do. I would say, if you can stick at it.
And you did tell me earlier that you, after 3 months, because you were relatively slow, you'd only done about 1,000 miles.
Yeah.
And so I know that all foreigners coming to this country have about a 6-month visa. Yeah. That means you had to do 1,600 miles in the next 3 months, didn't you?
Yeah.
Did that become a difficulty for you? Did that become a pressure?
That became the total obsession. absolute, how many miles am I crushing today? Am I on target? How many days off can I afford between there and there? Because you do need a rest from it. Sometimes I got very, very trail sick in Oregon, for example, and came very, very close to quitting. And then it all sorted itself out. But I think that's I don't know about the Appalachian Trail or the CDT, but I think that is the PCT, that you do start off, most of us start off quite slowly, and then you hit the Sierras, which slows you down. So the first, that is the big time consumer, is getting those first bits done, that first 1,000 miles. And after that, Oregon is, you zip through Oregon. Even someone as slow as me zipped through Oregon. And then you hit Washington, and by the time you got to Washington, you're used to doing 20 plus miles a day, so you kind of get faster and faster and faster.
And for listeners, I mentioned Sierras because, and I'm not even going to talk about it, because when I asked PI what the Sierra was like, she just said horrific. So that was good enough for me. Yeah. So horrific is fine as far as I'm concerned.
Just cold, nosebleeds, frostbite, snow melt, big rivers, cold feet. Ice, frozen shoes, horrendous. Yeah.
So you got there, which
there.
is fantastic. Mm-hmm. You got by the sign and so on. What did it feel like when you got? Because we always talk about what it's like to get up to Qatar, and there's a big brown sign on the top of a mountain. But there you go around the corner, and there's your sign. What did it feel like for you? It must have been similarly wonderful.
No. It was because the Canadian border was closed. We still had to hike 30 miles back.
Oh my gosh.
So there was that sense of, okay, I've still done this, but I'm not even, for a day and a half, no one in the world is going to know whether, to be even longer, because you haven't had any kind of human contact. So no one's going to know. So you have actually this really private time where you're the only one that knows you've done it. And and I imagined, because it had been such a lonely, long journey, and there was, I'd probably say about 70% of my trail I was alone, and then I'd hooked up with Jeff, and we'd hiked together for the last 2 weeks. So we had it in our minds that we would be the only people at the monument, and it was going to be this great reverence. And of course, loads of day trippers go for a short weekend. So it was like people coming and going. It was not peaceful at all. And so, of course, I had a cheese sandwich and looked at the monument for an hour, and then thought, I've still got 30 miles to go. Better make a move now. Yeah. Oh, dear. Yeah.
So you came home, and I know you had to spend time in quarantine, which is kind of another sad thing, which puts off celebrating, I guess. Had you noticed, has your life changed noticeably because of this hike? And do your friends see a change in you?
That's a tough one, because we've only just been released from lockdown, so we're only just starting to allow to socialise. We haven't. I think it was about 6 weeks ago that actually restrictions were lifted. So, but I look back, and AA is the single biggest thing that has changed my life. It's the best thing I've ever done. Right. And doing the PCT is a long distance second, but it's still an amazing accomplishment. I think what I've noticed is that I remain really calm. Nothing really phases me now. And, I can still have bad days, and I can still get depression and things like that, which I've been a lifelong sufferer of. But I miss the trail, and I miss the simplicity. And I think you said it before. I miss that simplicity of knowing every single day I've just got to get up and I've just got to walk. And then I walk till sunset, and then I have my dinner and I go to sleep.
It's not that tricky, is it? It's not that tricky. You just keep going.
Yeah.
Now, I mentioned at the start that you've recently published a book about your journey. What led you to make that decision? Was this something you felt you wanted to do, or you just trying to get a bunch of cash? I mean, what are you trying to do with your book?
Well, yes, I knew I was going to be writing a book. I knew before I even left. Oh, right. I knew that I was, so that's hence whilst I took a lightweight laptop with me. So every single day I set the target for writing 1,000 words, which sounds...
Oh, wow, did you?
So when I came back, I had nearly 200,000 words to try.
That's an achievement to be able to do that. Wow.
Oh, yeah. So I knew I was going to do that. So unfortunately, again, it's just the way life panned out. Of course, we were in lockdown. What else? We had nothing to do. There was no chance of obtaining work. It was just... sit and wait this stuff out. So
yeah, sure.
So for me, it gave me a real sense of purpose when I came out of lockdown. Came out of quarantine was to, I found a little place to rent, and then and a really pretty little cottage, and became that sort of archetypal writer that you see in films. So
how nice is that?
So
you've got the book, It's a nice cover, by the way. And I want to tell people the title. I want to ask about the title. Everything You Ever Taught Me. Who's the you?
The you, it's two things. One, every single day, as I promised my sponsor, I listened to a podcast. So everything I learned from the realms of AA, I took with me, and I listened to their words and their recordings of meetings every single day. So that's part of the you. And the other part of the you is the people that you meet along the way. Everybody teaches you something. And so everyone I interacted with taught me something. So I didn't feel like I went in knowing absolutely nothing. I couldn't have been more ignorant, more naive, more idiotic, and I came out.
I think that's great preparation. I really do. Yeah. I do. If you know nothing, if you'd known what it was going to be like, you probably wouldn't have gone, would you?
No. Well, I mean, I kind of, but like I say, it was about 2 weeks before the end that somebody sort of asked me a very serious question about thru-hiking, and I was, I said, well, don't ask me, I know nothing. And they said, you know everything. You've walked, 2,500 miles, you know everything. And it was like, actually, I do. I can talk about this with confidence now. So it was just learning, just learning so much, and It's
I love the subtitle. Yeah. The subtitle's a good one as well. Yeah. If you've got a lot on your mind, go for a walk.
Totally.
Is that a therapy you would recommend to people?
No, because that is what a therapist said to me. If you've got a lot on mind, go for a walk. And of course, don't give me challenges like that, because I take it too far, and I did. But there is a lot of things. That's all you have to do is think and think and think and think. And eventually, you drive yourself batty with it. So eventually I found all those head demons, as I call them, all those little worry warts that constantly chatter away in my head. Eventually, after about 2,000 miles, they finally shut up. Yeah.
Well, I never did, really. I for the first 800 miles, especially the first hike, I didn't have headphones in my ears at all. I was thinking, apologising for so much in my previous life, that I was driving myself crazy. Yeah. I just was. Yeah. Now, I see on your Facebook that you wrote the other day, I'm thrilled to have been called an inspirational woman, and my book, Everything You Ever Taught Me, listed on not one, but 2 new websites today. What is it that you'd like women, particularly, to take away from your experience? Because obviously you've been inspiration to a number of people. I know some of the comments on your Facebook post, you've inspired a number of women to do certain things, not necessarily do a 2,600 mile walk. But what would you like them to take away from your experience? I think women like me who are dogged by fear and insecurity and those voices in your head that always say you're not quite good enough, or laughing at you and that sort of thing. They're just voices, they're just noises, and it's possible to bat them away with effort. And I think if that's what I inspire women to achieve, is more sense of self and more sense of ownership of, certainly women my age, 40s, 50s, 60s, to sort of drop those old hang-ups. If anybody could do that, that would be great. That would be nice. Well, I tell you, it's been fantastic to talk to you, and I really appreciate you responding. You ever going to do another long distance hike?
If the book sells lots and lots and lots of copies, I would love to go and do the CDT, but at the moment, it wouldn't be practical.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story. I think it's been inspirational to me. I think you've done an amazing thing, and I just thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Take it easy. Bye. So how'd you get on handling 2 English accents? She's quite the woman, isn't she? And it was lovely to hear how she learned that she really can do anything she wants. She even used the word that I've mentioned quite a bit in the past, accomplished. She feels accomplished. And do you know what? Nobody ever will be able to take that accomplishment away from her. How cool is that? Do you know what else I loved about talking with PI? That she was so open about her status as a recovering alcoholic, and that the program had helped her not only navigate her sobriety, but also her hike. Good for you, PI. So, thanks this week go to monthly sponsors Brian Helton Jr., Lisa Rana, Erskine Bass and Jenny Grunke. New donations came from Connor Mulligan, Jose Cedre, have I got that right, Jens Lipperheider and Ronelle Baker. And of course, thanks to Cedar Trail Gear for their sponsorship this month. Thanks to all of you who've stepped up and offered help to keep all our shows up and running. If you want to help out, please go to hikingradionetwork.com and click on one of the many donate buttons that you're going to find there. Now, just a few hours ago, I caught up with Katie, who was enjoying an energetic lug up a mountain in Maine. Here's Katie. So we're back and with Katie. Hey, Katie, how are you?
Hey, Steve, I'm doing pretty well.
And you're climbing at the moment. Well, not at the moment, but you were climbing.
Yeah. My first break of the day. So, yeah, about halfway up Mt Avery.
Those mountains are just extraordinary, aren't they? I mean, how are you finding Maine? How are you finding Maine so far?
Well, I would say it's both beautiful and challenging. So, started the Bigelows yesterday, did Little Bigelow Mountain. They're beautifully maintained. They're just really challenging.
Yes.
And they look like a postcard. So,
have you noticed a step up in difficulty? I mean, obviously you're now going southbound, and I always recall the north side of those mountains being pretty darn steep to go down. So going up, they must be pretty darn steep as well.
Yes, they are steep. A friend of mine, another hiker, said she became a tree hugger in Maine, and I've added trees to my hiking tools.
Yes, you actually grab hold of the roots, don't you, on the way up and on the way down?
Yep.
And that's quite a skill you develop, isn't it?
That and sliding down rock faces on my butt.
Yeah, I've done that a few times as well. Yeah. So how's the weather? How's the weather in Maine? Is it getting colder or not?
Oh my gosh. Well, today and yesterday, just beautiful, sunny, cool, like in the 60s and 70s. But the day before, I hiked for a couple of miles during a lightning storm.
Oh, gosh.
I was trying to reach a goal, and there really wasn't anywhere to stealth. So I just kept going. I was in these bogs, and the forest was dense, so I felt like I was probably okay. And then I set up my tent about 4 miles short of my goal.
Oh,
so,
right.
But that was that was kind of challenging.
So
but
you
the
by
weather
yourself?
Been nice.
Are you by yourself then?
I am.
Right.
I am.
And as we know, you're enjoying that.
Well, I do, but then I get so happy when I see someone. So, I've run into several hikers who I knew hundreds of miles ago who I'd maybe hiked with for a week or two,
nice.
and now they're getting ready to go into the 100-mile wilderness. One father and son will finish. And then I met a couple of brothers who are doing a flip-flop, started from Harper's Ferry, just saw them yesterday. They sent me a text, said, "Where are you?" And we were like a half mile from each other, and then got to see each other. So
that's all lovely. That's all lovely. Now, I know you've been to Monson. What did you do in Monson?
Mm-hmm. Well, I took a day to resupply and washed everything. Stayed at Shaw's, camped at Shaw's one night, and then stayed at a little place called, what was it called? Lakeshore House.
Oh, I know that.
House.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
The pub. Little pub.
That's right. That's how I know it.
So stayed there, and then got started. The people I was with wanted to take another zero,
right.
But I wanted to get going, and so.
What was the atmosphere like in Monson? And the reason I ask you is I don't recall it so much my 2019 hike, and I can't think why I don't, but I certainly remember in 2014, the atmosphere, it's almost like people came in there and stayed for a day or two, getting ready for the 100-mile wilderness and getting ready for Katahdin. And there was a fantastic atmosphere. Does that still exist?
Right. Well, I noticed that the people going southbound who'd already flipped or, otherwise had a much, I think they were more serious because they still had lots of miles.
Right.
The people who are northbound knew they just had the 100-mile wilderness and Katahdin, so they were like really excited and
Yes.
upbeat and partying and.
But it's not a walk in the park, is it? I mean, the 100-mile wilderness. While I don't think it's as difficult as perhaps some people seem to think, but it's not easy. I mean, it's not not as if you're just wandering along a nice flat path. Certainly in the early miles, So, is the you were obviously ready for Maine because you've done all those miles in your legs before. You've then got New Hampshire to come as well, going southbound through New Hampshire. When does that start? when do you start in New Hampshire?
Today I get off in Stratton, and then I will have a little less than 80 miles, I think, about 80 miles to go to finish Maine, and then I'll be in New Hampshire. Right. So,
yeah, you gotta love it.
I asked, so everybody has this different perspective. I think about it, the trail's just the trail. And I asked one person, well, tell me about New Hampshire and the mountains. And they're like, well, they're intimidating, but they're so beautiful and awesome. Yes. And then the other one I asked, and they just get this blank look on their face like, I hope I never have to do that again.
Oh, I can guarantee it. Well, I can't guarantee it, but I would think you're not going to feel that way. I think you're going to be awed by it. I'm sure you've been awed a little bit by Maine as well. I think Maine is just as beautiful. So I think you are doing some fabulous parts of the hike right now. So stay in the moment. Now, last week when I can't actually remember the question I asked specifically, although you then texted me afterwards and said, good morning. Your question yesterday, how have you changed during this hike and how has your hike changed, was a great question. I would love us to talk more about that so that I have time to reflect on this. I cannot stop thinking about it. Now, that's interesting. Why did the question take you in that way? And then let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think because it's a really complex question for me. I mean, it sounds like it might be straightforward, but, I was thinking about first of all, how my hike's changed in that it's just my day has a rhythm. It's just a rhythm to my day. Sure. Like when I was working and teaching, I had a rhythm to the day. And Absolutely. So my identity right now is tied up in these mountains. And, it never occurs to me whether I am or am not a thru hiker. This is just what I'm doing and I am. And, it doesn't occur to me to say anymore. I used to say when people would say, are you a thru hiker? I'd say, well, today I am. but I don't think about it like that anymore. I'm out here and I'm part of the pulse of what's going on out here. So that I think is how my hike's changed. As far as
so has it changed? Do you feel it's changed? Do you feel it's changed your identity in many ways?
I do, and that surprises me because I'm older, so I thought my identity was pretty set. But I think I said once before, no one would mistake me for an athlete. But here I am, and I am, doing, anywhere from 13 to 17 mile days. I'm not doing those huge miles, but, and I know that will decrease, as I get into the more strenuous part, but, my body has changed a lot, and I described it to my brother, who said I looked skinny. And I said, it's grit and sinew. But, and also just the way I look at people and, I feel like I'm a lot less judgmental, Yes. When you're standing on the outside, you have the luxury of, I don't know, just quick judgment. And now I just,
I didn't say anything then. I let you. You were searching for the word, and you know what? Judgment is something I definitely was incredibly judgmental on the first probably week of my hike, and then I think I lost it. I think I probably got it back again a little more than I should do. But you certainly, this is a humbling thing, isn't it? And what you're doing, it does, because it strips you bare, it enables you to examine parts of yourself you don't find terribly attractive, possibly. And that judgment that you perhaps did have, which I think is why everybody says the people on the trail are so great, because the people on the trail have all realised that themselves have perhaps been judgmental in the past. And one thing about this hike, it is such a leveler. You're the same. You're as good or bad or indifferent as a 22-year-old boy and the 78-year-old man or girl, or whatever it is, And I think it's that leveling effect of it that I think is so wonderful to hold on to. And I think it's one of the things you're probably going to miss most when you're finished.
Yeah, well, I'm going to try to hold on to that perspective for myself, because I think it was a part of me that a little embarrassed by and not too proud of, but
Well, don't worry, I won't tell anyone.
Oh man!
Oh dear.
Well, it is beautiful in Maine, and what's one of my favorite states so far. I'm sitting here. Oh my gosh! Like 6 feet from me is this tiny little squirrel nibbling on a little pine cone. He's not big like the ones in the south.
Yeah. Well, they're hardy little things, aren't they, up there?
Because
it can get darn cold. I think you've come down though, because we actually hiked through Maine in August. So we had lovely weather when we went up through Maine, so that was nice. So you've now got, it's going to get cooler, but as you go down south,
it is getting cool. Yeah, it's getting cool, and I've got my 10-degree bag now, and so that helps.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, look,
saw a moose.
Well, you saw a moose. Hang on, tell me. I didn't know that. Tell me about the moose.
I just saw. Actually, what I saw was his silhouette through the trees looking down into a creek early in the morning.
Still counts.
And the only thing I could assume was that it was a moose to be that big.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah. You just got to look out. I mean, to see one in the water is pretty darn cool. I've seen one in the water.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen several running across the road, which is not good. Actually, that was somewhere near Stratton. No, that was near Rangeley. That's right. Yeah. Oh dear. I'm knowing that you're up there in Maine and then New Hampshire, I'm just so excited for you. This next few weeks are just going to be just awesome, and I just wish you well with it all. And hopefully we'll speak again next week.
Sounds great, Steve.
Okay. Speak to you soon.
All right. Okay.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
She's really into her rhythm now, isn't she? You kind of notice you're in that rhythm over a period of a week or so. Suddenly you're aware of it and you're totally at one with the woods. Katie has had some tricky issues to deal with on this hike, and early on she was never able to get into that rhythm. I'm so pleased that she's experiencing it now. Just before we get on to Winton Porter's book, don't forget I'm still looking for people who want to start their own hiking podcast and become part of the Hiking Radio Network. I'm going to set up your show for you, teach you how to record, I'll edit everything, and I'll post it for you as part of the network. You'll have an advantage over a lot of other new shows because we do have an audience already, and I'll be introducing your show to this audience. It will cost you, but nowhere near as much as it will cost you if you try to work out how to do it yourself. Believe me, I spent a fortune making mistake after mistake until I worked out how to do this. Email me at steve@hikingradionetwork.com. We can have a little chat about it to see if it's something you'd like to do. Finally today, Winton Porter. I guess sounds off about what was then a new thing, ultralight hiking gear. He's definitely got an opinion he wants to share. I'll see you next week. Chapter 4, Power Bars and Olive Oil. Up on the breezeway, which is feeling colder by the minute, I spy another late evening hiker, this one young, small and thin. He's carrying an ultralight backpack and facing away from me, doing a silly up and down dance to warm himself. As a play on the name of a popular model, the Go Light Breeze, imagine a nylon sandwich bag with shoulder straps, my co-workers and I sometimes call such bags Go Freeze packs. The sad-looking thing probably holds about 12 pounds. It wasn't designed for much more. I hail him. "Cold night, don't you think?" The kid, startled, ceases his jerking dance and turns to follow my voice. "It's not that bad," he says, "but I sure could use some more food. I just hiked 20 miles today." "Wow, that's a big day in these mountains. When did you start?" You could hear the shiver in his voice, but he's trying not to act cold. "Started at Amicalola yesterday and left from Hawk Mountain Shelter today." He has hiked more than 40 miles in 2 days. "Wow, impressive. Got a trail name?" "Yes, they call me Cricket. I made most of my gear myself. Ever heard of Ray Jardine?" I've been expecting this question. Ray Jardine is a controversial and unquestionably great adventurer, inventor and author who, since he walked away from a career in aerospace engineering nearly 40 years ago, has made a revolutionary impact in more than one field of outdoor recreation. First, it was rock climbing. In the 70s, Jardine was the first man to free climb the Phoenix route up the west face of Yosemite's El Capitan. He accomplished the climb with the help of a contraption he called the Friend, a spring-loaded camming device of his own invention. The Friend opened a new frontier in rock climbing, helping to conquer any number of ascents that expert climbers had considered impossible without pounding iron. How deeply does Jardine's influence run in today's climbing world? Well, spring-loaded camming devices are now produced under many names by many manufacturers, but climbers will still refer to them, more often than not, as friends, the way you will call a facial tissue a Kleenex or a cotton swab a Q-tip. The first commercial models were sold to park rangers out of the back of Jardine's car. By the 80s, Jardine had mostly given up rock climbing for other outdoor pursuits, but he kept his radical style and his engineer's approach. He developed a lifelong habit of pulling off incredible feats with homemade gear. It's amazing what you can do with a sewing machine and a background in rocket science. Most outdoors people know something about Jardine, having read or at least heard of his books. And if not, his website Chronology documents a life of extreme adventure. By sea, he and his wife, Jenny, an exceptional outdoors woman in her own right, have kayaked the Alaskan coastline and rowed across the Atlantic Ocean in watercraft that Jardine designed. On land, they've tandem cycled across the United States and back, skied to the South Pole, survived more than 4,000 skydives, sailed around the world for a few years, and hiked the Triple Crown of North American long-distance trails, the Pacific Crest Trail, the Continental Divide Trail, and of course, the AT. For all those exploits and his contributions to rock climbing, it's as a backpacker and an author of guides to backpacking that Ray Jardine has had his broadest influence. After completing a hike of the PCT in the early 90s that took too long for his liking and left him a little sore, Jardine became convinced that the prevailing wisdom in backpacking was burdening hikers with unnecessary weight, so he set out to lighten his load. His aim was to be able to spend more of his hiking day actually hiking and less of it recuperating from the strain of lugging his stuff. Less gear for Jardine means less bodily suffering under the physical weight of the gear and less spiritual suffering under the metaphorical weight of the gear too. Less tugging on various straps, less fretting about expensive shoes, and fewer material possessions to come between hiking and your experience of the natural environment. In the early 90s, over years of investigations and experiments and long hours at his sewing machine, Jardine refined a systematic approach to hiking engineered to the last detail to help hikers travel as lightly as possible. In 1999, he set out his Ray Way principles in a popular book, Beyond Backpacking, that effectively launched the ultralight backpacking movement. Although Jardine has written and publicly said a good deal about his hiking philosophy and his hiking technique, at the practical level, the Ray Way is primarily a matter of hiking equipment. When the Jardines took to the AT, they carried neither parkas nor sleeping bags, but rather hand-sewn quilts that were lighter than either and served the roles of both. They carried modified umbrellas, the springs and catches removed, so they could hike in cool rains without sweating under rain gear. And because they didn't have much on their backs, they didn't need heavy ankle support, and so they hiked in running shoes instead of heavy boots. Ray's first piece of advice for hikers is not to buy expensive hiking equipment, but to make it themselves whenever possible. Now, instead of selling rock climbing tools out of his car, Jardine sells hiking kits from his website. Rayway hats, packs, quilts, tarps and more, for anyone who can sew them. His reputation is staked to the claim that you, the average hiker, whoever you are and whatever your level of experience, can make hiking equipment for yourself that will outperform the best commercially manufactured equipment at a fraction of the cost. Since I make a good portion of my living and feed my daughters by selling commercially manufactured hiking equipment, naturally I take an interest in this point. Yes, I know, Ray, I say to Cricket, so I've escaped the preacher and his sermon only to meet a Raybot, and he's blocking the door to my house. Yes, great, Cricket says. I'm only carrying 12 pounds and I got all I need. Hey, you mind opening up the shop so I can get some food? Sure, no problem. The Rayway places high importance on maintaining proper ventilation. Poor Cricket, covered in goosebumps, looks as if he's had all the ventilation he can take. So he follows me up the stairs toward the shop, never taking a breath, all the while giving me a sewing lesson, telling me all about the fabrics he used, the stitch patterns and whatever else I need to know to be just like him. I open the door and step into the warm building, thankful to be inside. Cricket also looks relieved. Now he doesn't have to pretend he's warm. I turn on the light and Cricket continues his chatter as he scours the shelves for food. 2 piles start to form on the counter. First, call it the Eat Now stack. Twinkies, moon pies, ho-hos, ding-dongs, and to wash it all down, Nestle chocolate milk and a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. The second pile is Eat Later. Power bars and a bottle of olive oil. I'm thinking, could it be possible that the Ray of Way was instructing his audience to oil up the power bars and shove them up your you-know-where so you don't have to include it in your total pack weight? Maybe I could interest the gentleman in a jar of vegetable shortening, perhaps a nice box of bouillon cubes. Go freezers always seem to be in a hurry, and Cricket is in a big hurry. His mouth moves at 100 miles an hour. His brain is doing about 65, so he asks a lot of questions and then answers them himself moments later. Then he bounces on to another subject. Talking with him or listening to him is like watching a game of ping-pong. Cricket grabs a moon pie, rips open the package and tears into it like a starved child. Even with marshmallows streaming down his face, his teeth and mouth covered in chocolate, Cricket keeps talking. He even tries on some sarcasm with his mouth full. Maybe the glucose rush has him feeling his oats. Hey, he says, I hear you go through people's packs around here and help them lighten their load. You want to go through mine? I don't know why go freezers love asking me this question so much, or what explains the gloating behind it. You might expect that they'd be a little more embarrassed to admit that they weren't the first to dream up the idea that less weight isn't such a bad thing. In fact, Mountain Crossings has been offering pack consultations since 1983, going back to the Hansons' time when they owned the place before me. We inspect hundreds of our hikers' packs every year, tell them what they can afford to leave behind, try to keep them safe, and then we box up what they don't need and ship it home for them. My post office receipts tell me that we lighten hikers' loads by about £9,000 per year. I tell him that I go through packs for people who are willing to listen to good advice, and that my advice will probably be 1, to get a bigger pack, and 2, to put more in it. You're crazy, man, says Cricket. I got all I need. Fine with me, I reply. The less you carry, the easier it will be for us to haul your cold corpse out of the woods. I'm not even sure he's listening, and I can't help but feel agitated. What concerns me about Rayway is that it recommends to hikers of all skill levels a style that only the healthiest and most experienced outdoors people have any business trying. The rest of the hikers out there, the ones who, when they come into mountain crossings, ought to be glad to run into an old-fashioned, retrograde hiker like me, aren't just buying stuff, they're investing in sound equipment. They're buying the considerable peace of mind that comes from not having to bet their own lives on their sewing skills. Before your equipment can spiritually oppress you, you have to know how it works. While on my soapbox, I will say this, however. For Ray Jardine himself, the Rayway is an exhaustively researched and safely practiced set of weight-saving hiking techniques. But in the hands of others, the Rayway can turn out to be a foolish adventure in unnecessary risks, taken on by people who act like converts to a new religion. Practically speaking, very few go-freezers actually have the skill to go ultralight, 18 pounds or less, but they delight in showing off their gear or lack thereof. A go-freezer will enter the store like a missionary landing on a desert island, looking for converts. He will not remove his pack until he has made a complete circuit of the store and established contact with all of his potential disciples. He will wait until some hiker or tourist stops him and asks the question, "How much are you carrying?" That will be my cue to run, because then the go-freezer will loudly give 20 minutes of show and tell, sprinkled with advice that is perfectly capable of killing a novice hiker. A ding-dong later, Cricket finally looks down at his watch and seems shocked and irritated that he has wasted so much time with someone who obviously just doesn't get it. He crams the last Twinkie into his mouth, shoves the Ben & Jerry's into the top of his pack and says, "Man, I've got to put down some more miles." It's 10 p.m. and I don't have the heart to tell him that the trail will still be there tomorrow. He grabs his pack and tosses it over his shoulder, waves a goodbye and heads out the door. 3 hours have now passed since the preacher and then Cricket arrived out of the dock, and I'm more than ready to return to the minor warmth of our little apartment. Margie, Sierra and Ali have fallen asleep on the mattress we have pulled into the den. I quickly and quietly close the door and pause inside to savour my good fortune, watching my family at peace. The indoor thermometer tells me that the temperature is up, all the way to 38. I grab my sleeping bag and crawl onto the couch, replaying the evening in my head as I slowly fade out myself.